All right, so maybe I can quickly introduce the topic, then I will leave the space to the customer. I am Raf, I'm a solution architect at AWS in global financial service, and I work with the Zurich Insurance Group. Today we have Eamonn Carey, which is the head of cloud platform engineering at Zurich, and he's going to show us how they accelerated the migration to AWS with some cool process, and in collaboration also with one of our partners, which is HashiCorp. I would go quickly to the agenda. So I will give you a very quick introduction of the customer, then Eamonn will drive us through the empowerment, partnership and collaboration, and the foundational part that drive this initiative, how he built the platform team, what was the original state, and what they were able to achieve with the Scalable Account Vending. And then we're going to have a view of the day two management of cloud acceleration, the inner sourcing, and what they provide. So what the CCoE, the team lead by Eamonn, it's providing in terms of curated service and pattern to accelerate further the adoption of AWS. Quick introduction on the customer. Zurich Insurance Group, it's a leading multi-line global insurance and is operating over 200 territories. In 2022, we published a blog post where Zurich commit to a multi-year cloud acceleration program to migrate over 1,000 applications to AWS. One of the objectives from Zurich is to establish a standard set of reusable pattern and curated service pre-built using Terraform to minimize migration and modernization after, and to maximize the reuse of those patterns. And the challenge that the account vending machine addressed was the scalability. As you can imagine, it's a large organization, and they had to provision over 3,000 accounts in a very fast way. So they need to find a way to how all this process can be automated, but still by respecting governance policy that a global insurance like Zurich need to go through. Now I leave the stage to Eamonn, which will drive us through this solution.
All right, cheers. Thank you very much, Raf. So I suppose before we get into the presentation too much, I think it's probably worth defining what scalable account vending is, at least in the context of Zurich. But so scalable account vending, I suppose, is what we call a project we had internally to build a new mechanism to build our AWS accounts at scale. And so as Raf mentioned there, we were planning a very ambitious program that would require us to create thousands of AWS accounts. So how we vend those accounts and how we run those accounts from a day two perspective matters to us a lot. So part of what how we built this, we leveraged a AWS component called AFT, or Account Factory for Terraform, which was jointly developed between HashiCorp and AWS. Effectively, it replaces Terraform Landing Zone if anyone has used that previously. Up until that point, we were using CFCT, and CFCT has its limitations in terms of what we wanted to achieve. So we were leveraging AFT, Terraform in particular, and then we're building our new scalable account vending solution. So whilst this is a presentation about scalable account vending, I think one of the key things to talk about is how we got there, or why we felt this was important. Because it's easy enough to create an account, but doing it in a very particular way is quite important to us. So some key principles we had in terms of how we wanted to empower the organization. Well, one was to automate everything. So we have to take into account, we have legacy systems, we have skill gaps, we have security and compliance requirements, we have data privacy requirements, we have cost requirements. So automating everything is key into how we empower the organization, accelerate. Building reusability into everything we do is hugely important. So build it once and deploy it many times. Building a modular design and adding that efficiency allows us to have a greater degree of focus on innovation. We wanted to create a level of autonomy within the organization as well. So we want to harness the human capital within the organization. So we want to bring everybody on this journey. And part of that is making sure that this all works from a day two perspective. So we also wanted to create a globally consistent landing zone. So everything built through automation has to be globally consistent, standardized, secure, compliant, with a large degree of uniformity in there. Obviously, it needs to be secure by design. So building out our AWS accounts, we're trying to bake in that security, that compliance, that resilience, protecting sensitive data, growing and maintaining customer trust. And all of this feeds into that compliance transparency. So if we're completely upfront about everything we're doing and we do everything out in the open and in full view, then there is that transparent view of our compliance. So we're well aware of the task that's ahead of us. We completely understand what's going on. I'm not going to read this entire slide. There's no point. It's just there for backdrop. But in order to tackle this, we needed to have strategic partners. So as Raf mentioned, we partnered with AWS, in particular for our scalable account vending and our consumption of Terraform. We partnered with HashiCorp. We like it because it's platform agnostic. AWS is not our only CSP. We do use Azure as well, and we wanted the infrastructure as code platform that was agnostic. But we also partnered with our internal technical teams, such as the network team, the security team, our customer teams, and so on and so forth. Like, in order to tackle this problem, we need to collaborate and have very close partnerships with other parts of the organization and other companies. So before we get into the scalable account vending itself, I think there's two concepts I want to try and, I suppose, focus on. One is building our cloud foundations. So cloud foundations for us is a set of capabilities that allow us to migrate workloads at pace, at scale in, and it's how we build our scalable account vending solution. So cloud foundations helps our customers answer a number of questions, such as, are they compliant with our compliance, our security policies? How do they establish the connectivity they need? How do they know that their environment is structured correctly? How do they know that they're safe, and so on? There's multiple questions they would have that we needed to answer. So building that foundation capability is important to answering all those questions. It allows our customers to both deploy and operate and then govern their workloads after they've been deployed. So this is a graphic I stole from the AWS website. And in this slide, it just covers off 6 capability areas, such as infrastructure, operations, governance, compliance, business continuity, and finance. And there's various different AWS services that make up that foundation piece. But building out the foundational services component of the landing zone is hugely important, and it's something that cannot be overlooked. And towards the end of the slide, there's a lessons learned bit, but one thing I would say right now is don't overestimate the time it takes to get this right, because it does take a lot of time. So then the other bit, in order to make us successful, we have a platform team. So focusing on the creation of a platform team that operates the landing zone as a product is key to us. So without being overly conceited about it, or anyway conceited about it, we do see the platform team as being the glue that holds everything together. So we work closely with other cloud teams that build our curated services, such as the database and analytics team, the compute storage team who develop our curated services. We work with other organizations or other teams within the organization, such as security and network, on-prem teams, the command center. And then ultimately, we're here to serve our application product team. So we work very, very closely with them as well. So in order to be successful, we have to work closely with them, and creating a platform team, treating the landing zone as a product, focusing on a you build as you run it ethos is really, really important to being successful. So this is probably going to be a very familiar story to a lot of people. And I think it's important to establish where we were coming from. So if you want to get an AWS account or an account in your AWS environment previously, this is the process you would have had to go through. So everything starts with an account request form. So the customer will go in, fill in a form, provide some mandatory details like what BU you are, what cost center you are, what application you're building, and so on and so forth. That would then go for a manual review. So a human being would have to review that data, make sure that data was correct, that the app ID is correct, the cost center is correct, and so on and so forth. And that had a 2-day SLA on it. So it could easily just take 2 days to get through that process. Once that was completed, then it would go off and it would create Active Directory groups in the background. And then the customer, it would also then create the AWS account as well. So a pipeline task would create the AD account, a pipeline task would create the AWS account. In parallel then, while we're waiting for the groups to sync, control is passed back to the customer and they can go and request access to the AD groups that were created. That would also go for manager approval. So once you request access to an AD group, your manager has to approve it. And again, whatever SLA applies to that is applied to that. And once that's done, then the user is added to the group. All the while then controls pass back to the customer as well to request a VPC inside the account that they just got. And again, that goes for manual review with a 2-day SLA on it. Again, validate the same set of data, BU code, app ID, cost center, and so on and so forth. And once that's completed, it would create the VPC. So all in all, that is quite a slow process. At the best possible scenario, that takes about 36 hours to run through, and that only gets you one environment. You have to repeat that for every single environment. So if you want a dev environment, a test environment, a prod environment, you have to go through this multiple times. And this was run through CFT-CT as well, so we used to suffer regular stack failures. It could take 6 hours to run. If it failed, everything subsequent to that failed. So there was a lot of issues we had with that. So Scalable Account Vending was conceived to fix this problem and add a whole host of other things to it. So then, what is Scalable Account Vending? But as I mentioned earlier, it is heavily built on AFT or Account Factory for Terraform, and it is designed to add a capability to create and baseline our AWS accounts in parallel. And just that whole parallel bit accelerates us straight off. So in the new world, again, it starts with an account request form. We will turn this into an API for customers who want to consume this through an API, but right now it's still a request form. There have been numerous improvements made to that form, that it's now data-driven, so the data is validated when it's entered, so it's not going to a human being to be validated anymore. So we have that in there as well. So immediately then, once you submit that form, it goes off and provisions the AWS accounts in parallel. So if you request a dev account, a test account, a product account, it'll go off and do them all in parallel. So once that pipeline stage finishes, it triggers another pipeline stage and to go off and baseline the account. And that's when we add in our controls and our guardrails and the Zurification of that account, what turns it into a Zurich managed AWS account. In parallel to that, we would map AD roles, and once that pipeline task is finished, it kicks off another Terraform Cloud run that will provision our Azure DevOps resources. And this is key, and it's a big bonus for our developer teams. So we will create a dummy project or a empty project for the customer, so that when this whole process is finished, they end up with a Azure DevOps project that they will have, that they can then start building their own infrastructure as code in. It goes off and provisions to Terraform Cloud Teams. It goes off then and provisions to Terraform Cloud Workspaces, and then it provisions to VPC. So the big win for us here is this went from about 3 days, best case scenario sort of thing, down to 45 minutes. And that's not for one account, that's to get as many accounts as you need. So that gets you 3 accounts. So over the course of the program, on a very conservative estimate, that's going to save us about 3,000 days of elapsed time, which is a significant amount of human effort. So one of the key things about the scalable account vending solution is we took the time to slow it down a bit and consider how this works from a day two perspective. It's easy enough to create an AWS account, but how do you manage that account going forward? And then how do you manage thousands of accounts going forward? So as I mentioned earlier on, it starts with a pipeline task. That pipeline task executes a Python script in the background, and it passes a set of parameters to a Jinja template. And for those that aren't familiar with Jinja template, it's just a templating engine that allows you to template for Python code or any code. In our case, we're using it to template Terraform code or HCL code. So it passes the parameters to that Jinja template. It in turn then renders a dynamic Terraform file. So that the HCL file or the Terraform file that will subsequently create the AWS account is dynamic. It gets generated at runtime. That code then gets committed to a config repo. So the code that's going to create the account is put into a config repo, and it triggers a Terraform Cloud workspace run. And that workspace run then executes the pipeline task that's going to build the AWS account. So why this is important is when this is finished, we end up with a config repo that contains the Terraform code that created the account, which we can then give to the customer and say, this is the code that created your account. If you need to change this in the future, it's your code to modify. So we don't have to maintain an estate of thousands of accounts. The people who own the accounts and will ultimately use the accounts can then maintain them going forward. So we own the PR on it, but they own the code. So just to dig into this a little bit deeper, and I don't want to get into the technical weeds too much, but I mentioned there is a Python script that is passing parameters to Terraform files, or sorry, Jinja templates. So you can see there's a template for Terraform teams, so by dev, test, and prod. There's a template for Terraform workspaces, dev, test, and prod, and so on. And that code goes off and creates the dev teams, the dev workspace, the prod teams, the prod workspace, and so on. And it's in the config repo. So in the future, when developers want to add something new to that account, they can go to that configuration repo and they can put in a pull request or a merge request against that code and change it, and then it'll go and execute. So they're not dependent on a centralized team to manage that going into the future. And as I mentioned earlier on, we also create them an empty project that they can then get started with and start building their own Terraform code. So the reason that's important, because this all ties together into a story, we want to inner source our code. So we want to build code once, and if someone else wants to build it for us, brilliant. If we want to get code from various different places within the organization, that's fine. It builds that collaboration and knowledge sharing we want to build. It builds code reuse, increases innovation. It just makes our life much easier, and it builds a community. And I think the community bit is the important bit. And one of the key things that we're trying to build here is a set of curated services. So we know that infrastructure as code abstracts the underlying infrastructure. So your Terraform will abstract the underlying EC2 or whatever it is we need to go and build. A curated service in our context is an abstraction of that infrastructure as code. So we've gone and we've created all the Terraform code that would take, say, to build a Zurich compliant EC2. And we put that into Terraform Cloud private module registry for our customers to come in and use. For others, then we can even create an even greater level of abstraction, which we call the curated pattern, which pulls together more than one curated service. So you could have an EC2 and a load balancer, or you could have an EC2 with an RDS, or whatever it happens to be. So we can create a pattern which a customer can then come in and consume. That reduces the time and cost. So because we do it once and we like to think we do it right and we do it well, it saves anybody else having to come along and reinvent the wheel. It lowers the barriers to entry for our customers as well. So they have their starter for 10. They know they can come in, they can just pick up a module out of the private module registry, pop it into their code and execute it, and they'll be able to get something stood up and compliant pretty quickly. That also reduces our time to innovation, so we can focus on being innovative where it matters. We're not repeating the same thing over and over and over again. It raises team empowerment, it raises the compliance level of everything we build, it increases the code quality, and ultimately it increases customer sentiment. So all of this builds to what we would like to think is velocity and acceleration. So everything we're trying to do is move faster, do everything faster. So at the end of that, you get an account pretty quickly. You have the configure repo that built it. You have your empty DevOps project that you can get started in. We've given you curated services to build EC2 or RDS or whatever it happens to be. So within a couple of hours, you can have code stood up inside AWS that you can be reasonably sure is going to be Zurich compliant. And that just increases our velocity quite substantially. It also breaks down a lot of the silos within the organization. So operating as a platform team, treating the landing zone as a product, trying to get the capabilities and the responsibilities into the platform team to be self-empowered, and then passing autonomy back to the customer as well, is all building a whole picture of empowerment and improved collaboration and everything else. So whilst we achieved a lot in terms of acceleration through Scalable Account Vending, we gained a lot in terms of maturity and velocity in how we engage with our customers and everything else. So there's a lot in there as well. Lessons learned, I think I mentioned earlier on, focusing on the foundations is really important. It definitely takes longer than you think. In our experience, it's not a greenfield site. We have a pre-existing identity solution we have to integrate with, pre-existing networking, pre-existing security, pre-existing monitoring. If we're a greenfield site and we were a startup or something, you could get a landing zone up and running pretty quickly. Doing it in an organization like Zurich is complicated, and I wouldn't underestimate how long it's going to take you. Keep it simple is the other thing. Don't over-engineer it. And most importantly, I think, is focus on the day two piece. It's easy enough to build an account. How do you run that and how do you maintain that at scale going into the future? So my last slide is this. It's just a brief summary, and I'm not going to labor through this slide, but it just focuses on some of the key things in terms of how we, I suppose, accelerate with Terraform. So the first bit is, I think everything's built on a foundation of partnership and collaboration, bringing in reusability, and that reusability delivers consistency, delivers abstraction, delivers compliance, all the while that builds out the platform, our curated services, and our security and compliance. There's various different pieces of how we do it through Terraform dropped into each of those boxes, but as I say, it's a nice little summary slide, but as I say, I'm not going to read it verbosely. And with that, I think we're pretty much on time. I'm not sure, is there any questions?
Yeah, actually, I want to give you a little food for thought. Like, it was really interesting to see the journey. I was lucky to join this journey in December 2022, so I saw it going through. And even from your point of view, I saw the lesson learned, and like now this has been a almost 2 years journey. Is there anything that now with experience that you build on this kind of complexity, would you have done maybe in a different style, going back and readdressing the same challenge?
I'd focus on different things earlier. I think that would be the key thing. I think we were a little bit into the journey when we had to stop and pause and go, right, we need to pay more attention to the day two management of this. Sometimes it does help to slow down, and by slowing down, you will ultimately go faster. So that would be the key thing, I'd say, is it's quite easy to go headlong into it and attack the problem. But sometimes it takes a little bit of courage to say, right, well, actually, no, let's take a pause. Let's consider how we run this next week. Like, it's not simply a case that we want to create an account. Yeah, we do, but we want to be able to manage that account going into the future. And there'll be several different decision points along the way, or inflection points along the way, where you actually have to sit and pause and go, right, how do we run this from a day two operations perspective? So that would be the key thing I'd add to there, Raf.
Thank you.